guess who's back? It's me. Love you guys. All right, so video chapter 6 questions. You should have watched the Soviet Union beat down a whole bunch of states behind the Iron Curtain. Why? Well, because it's the Cold War and you can't lose face, right? You can't look weak. You can't allow this war of prestige to slip through your hands and let your empire collapse. So just going back up a little bit here. Oh yeah, okay, so the chapter 5 questions focused us on, let me just have a look here. Oh yeah, okay, so at the end it was talking about the New Look defense policy and massive retaliation. So these two American policies by President Eisenhower definitely sort of raised the tension level between America and the Soviet Union in 1953 when Eisenhower is elected in America. Then we see the Soviets do a bit of an about face, and they in 1956 go for a policy known as peaceful coexistence, and that is good, right? Instead of the tension going up, it starts to go down, and that is a good thing. Unfortunately though, America is using their U-2 spy planes to spy on the Soviet Union, which is, I mean, a violation of their sovereignty, a violation of their airspace. And then on the 1st of May 1960, we see a U-2 spy plane get shot down, and the hopes for peaceful coexistence and for calm during the Cold War come crashing down with Francis Gary Powers, the guy who was piloting the plane. Now, chapter 6, it's sort of recapping a little bit what the new leadership of the Soviet Union is all about, and then we will see them moving into, or sorry, trying to hold on to their empire in different nations. So number 1 says, after Stalin's death, what political structure was in charge of the USSR, who ultimately was seen as the leader? So after Stalin died in 1953, whether it was by stroke, whether it was by poisoning, either way, the monster is gone, right? Like Stalin, the tyrant that he was, finally is taking the eternal nap, right? No one really knows how many people Stalin actually killed. The estimates range from, I've seen numbers as high as 50 to 60 million, as low as 20 million, but it was a lot of people, right? So when Stalin dies, what kind of structure is in charge of the Soviet Union? It was referred to as an oligarchy, not a dictatorship, but an oligarchy. So a dictatorship is ruled by one, and an oligarchy is ruled by a few, right? Ruled by a few, maybe, 5 or 6 people in that. But it's not one, but it's not democracy, right? It's not ruled by everybody or by the majority. It's a small little clique of individuals in the Soviet Communist Party, all right, and the Bolsheviks, who are leading now. And then the last part of the question says, who is ultimately seen as the leader? Well, of course, that is a man by the name of Nikita Khrushchev. Now, number 2, this is the important part of the chapter here. Which nations first revolted against the USSR's authority over them? What was the reaction of the Soviet Union? Okay, so guys, with Stalin dead, Khrushchev actually gives a speech at the 20th Communist Congress, and this is in number 3. And basically what he does is he gives like an hours-long speech where he denounces Stalinism. He basically calls him a bastard. He says he abandoned Marxism. He just tears to shreds Stalin's legacy. And with that, nations are like, oh, wait a minute. Is this like a softening of the Soviet Union? Are we seeing, maybe a bit of a softer line rather than what we saw under Stalin, where people knew like dissent was just not going to be tolerated? So with Khrushchev delivering that speech, what happens, guys, is it gives the people behind the Iron Curtain just a slight flicker, a slight glimmer of hope that, something better perhaps can come for them. So in 1953, the nation of East Germany, right, which of course is part of the Soviet Iron Curtain, right? They're behind the Iron Curtain. East Germany rebels against the Soviet Union, and it's usually called the East German Uprising. Now, why did they do this? Well, because they wanted freedom. They wanted self-determination, the same thing you and I want, right? And the East German Uprising ultimately was crushed by the Soviet-backed authorities in that nation, right? It was crushed. Dissent is not tolerated, and that is a constant theme that we see in all of this. Now, the next nation that rebels against the authority of the Soviet Union was in 1956 in the nation of Poland, right? A group of young striking workers, right? Basically want more rations, and they take to the streets to express their displeasure. And what is the reaction of the Soviet Union? Well, ultimately, it's very predictable. What they do is they kill a whole bunch of people, again, to demonstrate that dissent is not tolerated. So that's question number 2. Now, 3, I already addressed, right? That speech that Khrushchev gave that tore down the legacy of Joseph Stalin. And then, guys, that speech is collectively known as Khrushchev's thaw, right? When you thaw, things aren't as cold, right? They're not as unforgiving. So Khrushchev's thaw is like this perceived softening of the foreign policy of the Soviet Union. We knew under Stalin that dissent was not tolerated, but Khrushchev seems like perhaps he's a softer, less cold individual, hence the name or the term Khrushchev's thaw. Now, question number 5, which nations reacted in revolution to the perceived softening of the USSR's political repression? Well, again, East Germany, number 1, 1953. Number 2, Poland, 1956. And then there's the big one in 1956 as well. And that was in the nation of Hungary, right? So the nation of Hungary, guys, is significant. The Hungarian Uprising is sometimes called the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. This is where not just some people, but pretty much all Hungarians rose up against their Soviet enslavers and tried to fight for their freedom. And there's amazing images that come out of the Hungarian Uprising. And I just want to load one here for you. Images like this, right? This image right here, where you see Hungarian freedom fighters who have, in the short term, defeated the Soviet Union, right? So the Hungarian people, and again, it started with students, right? Young people who wanted freedom. So a group of students are protesting outside of the secret police building. They're brought in, they're questioned. As these people are being questioned inside, outside, more students show up and they start to cause a scene. The authorities decide that the right thing to do to disperse the crowd is to shoot at them, and it killed a bunch of young students. Well, this only incensed the people of Hungary, and it led them to rising up against the nation of Hungary, right? You can see images like this where the communist emblem was torn out of the middle of the Hungarian flag because they were just done, right? They were just done with their enslavers. Okay, going back to it. So number 6 says, what was the reaction of Hungary's uprising by communist leadership there? The reaction was indignance, right? They're like, no, you're not rebelling against us. And basically, they fought against the protesters. And here's the crazy thing, right? Here's the crazy thing. The Hungarian security forces lost. They lost against the people fighting for their freedom. And that's where you get, going back to it, this image right here where the people of Hungary are standing on top of a Soviet tank because they've brought down the bear, right? Like, think about what they're able to accomplish here. Little tiny Hungary was able to defeat the Soviet Union, or at least it seemed like it. Like, that was unthinkable. So at this point, Khrushchev has a decision to make, and that's number 7. So it says, ultimately, what did Khrushchev do about Hungary? What did Eisenhower do to help Hungary? Well, the answer, guys, look, if you're Khrushchev, right, 1953 East German uprising, not cool, right? 1956 uprising in Poland, not cool. Then we have basically a nationwide uprising in Hungary. Like, it seemed like the Soviet Union was starting to lose their grip on their empire, and Khrushchev could not have that. Again, this is the Cold War. This is a war of prestige. Homie can't play that, right? You just can't. And ultimately, guys, so after the Hungarian freedom fighters were standing on top of that tank, right, that I was showing you, there's about a 1-week period where the Soviet authority in that country sort of just got out because they weren't sure what was going to happen to them, right? They might get executed, rounded up, who knows? And during that 1-week period, people fled Hungary to neighboring nations like Austria. As a matter of fact, my uncle was actually born in Hungary, and it was during that 1-week time period after they defeated the Soviet Union, or at least it seemed like it, that they fled. I mean, in 1956, my uncle was probably three or four, maybe. So he was a young kid, but that's the impetus for them coming to Canada, was to escape that persecution from living in the Soviet Union. So anyways, after about a week, Khrushchev, again, homie don't play that, and he rolled in the tanks and crushed the Hungarian uprising. And ultimately, guys, like, the capital city of Hungary, Budapest, was destroyed. 2,500 to 3,000 people were injured. 2,500 to 3,000 people were killed, not injured, killed. And about 13,000 people were injured. Like, the city of Budapest was destroyed. And the Soviets were intolerant of any sort of dissent against their authority. And Khrushchev basically said, look, I had to do it, right? It's a lesson to all other socialist leaders behind the Iron Curtain, right? You do not leave unless we say you can leave, right? You don't have that choice. And what did Eisenhower do? Well, Eisenhower promised to help nations that were rebelling against the Soviet Union. And in the end, Eisenhower does nothing, right? His promise of help falls very much short of actual help, which is very unfortunate. All right. Yeah, that's it for chapter number 6, guys. In chapter 7, we will get into the so-called third world, right? First world is America. Second world is the USSR. Third world is everybody else, right? And in chapter 7, we see Vietnam, right? The Vietnam War, that senseless tragedy of 20 years. And all for what? Well, I told you before, what is the impetus for America getting involved in anything during the Cold War? The answer is, that's right, containment. You're good. All right. Peace out, guys. I love you. Check you later.